Diane. So if you could state your name and position title, please, and then swear either an oath or affirmation.
Right. My name is Robert Manning. My affirmation, I solemnly swear, solemnly and sincerely and truly declare and affirm that evidence now I'm about to give or about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. And just your position title or you're here on...
I have several titles. I'm here today as the General Manager of SORR, but I started this journey as a community science lead on the Central Coast Council's Changemaker program.
Okay, great. And do you have an opening statement for us?
Other than to say that as a concerned citizen, I entered the Tuggerah Lakes, or I entered the Central Coast Changemakers program because of the degradation of Tuggerah Lakes. I live on Tumby Creek. I observed pollution in that creek and set about the Changemakers course to find out what it was and how it could be remediated. During that process, I discovered a company which at the time was operating as Sustainable Oil Recovery, and then I was successful in getting a grant under the Changemakers program, which led to the Tuggerah Estuaries and Stormwater Trial on the Central Coast Council's Tuggerah Lakes. We deployed the Sustainable Oil Recovery boom in several locations on the lake, and it was the results that came back from the tests of that have led me to then now become the General Manager of SORR, the Sustainable Oil Company. Changed its name, changed its focus, changed its trajectory, and we are now operating in India, the UK. We're about to launch in South America, and we'll also be in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia by the middle of this year. We've had a great range of success with the solutions that we offer, which we believe to be a new remediation method for PFAS. That's what I'm here to talk about.
Great.
So,
thank
you.
Sorry, was that...
No, that's it. Thank you.
So just going back to the contamination firstly in Tuggerah Lake. So was there known contamination of PFAS, or did you discover that in your cleanup work firstly?
Right. So the remediation work for PFAS for the Tuggerah Lakes started as hydrocarbons because the gyroid sponge, the soil gyroid sponge, was developed to capture oil in water. When we deployed it at Shore Street, Long Jetty 15, 16 and 19 are the names of the stormwater outlets we deployed it in. The test results, we worked with the Newcastle Global Centre for Environmental Remediation, Chem Centre Labs in WA and microanalysis labs to conduct analysis both on the water and the sponge that we'd deployed. We found that the sponge not only was removing hydrocarbons in the form of C10 through C40 hydrocarbons, but it also was taking out heavy metals such as phosphorus, strontium, zinc, lithium, and other metals. But we also were capturing 2.4 grams of PFAS chemicals across the full range of both short and long string PFAS chemicals in the sponge. And the sponge was able to hold those chemicals. And we then reported that to Council in April of 2023. And then by April of 24, when we said we were still discovering PFAS in that water, we were asked to take the booms out and they removed our signage from the work that we're doing. So there's no longer any remediation activity happening on Tuggerah Lake. However, on Arimba Creek, the Newcastle University had conducted necropsies on platypus and discovered that the platypus in Arimba Creek, which flows into Tuggerah Lake, had been contaminated and had actually were deceased with large quantities of PFAS in their system. So we know that the PFAS that's in the water there is contaminating the marine life. It is in the soil that is at Tuggerah Lake, and it also is continuing to come through the stormwater outlets.
Okay, so you had this boom in place firstly, where you discovered that there were PFAS chemicals. Was it a range of different chemicals? You've got that
Correct.
analysis?
Yeah, there are full analysis, and I think in the submission there's details of the range of chemicals that are there.
All right.
But subsequently, we've worked with a laboratory in the UK called Socotec, who are one of the world leaders in testing water samples in the I suppose, spill response arena, and we've had it confirmed that the gyroid sponge is capable of capturing the full range of the PFAS chemicals, and then the destruction process we use, which is a titanium dioxide decomposition process, has the capability to actually break those chemical bonds that hold the strings of PFAS together, because it operates at a temperature of around 800 degrees 800 degrees Celsius without the use of flame. So it's a process that is normally used for chemical waste, but it's been developed to tackle our sponge and PFAS.
How long was it? How long was your sponge, your boom in the water at Tuggerah Lake?
For over 15 months.
So over 15 months, and then you approached Central Coast Council?
We approached Central Coast Council within the first 3 months of the deployment of the booms, reported that as part of the Tuggerah Estuaries and Stormwater Trial. Started as a grant program under the Australian Federal Government Estuary Reconstruction Program or some such. And so when the results of the testing were coming through for the hydrocarbons, David Meehan, the local member for the entrance, had identified that a number of long jetty outlets were contaminated with diesel, and so we were asked to deploy the sponges to pick up the diesel that was coming through the stormwater, but it's the same results were coming back for the PFAS at that 2.94 grams per kilogram.
Sorry, just talk us through, and I'll go to other members with questions. Talk us through what happened when the council told you to take the booms away, and that was it. Talk us through that. So you notified them of the results, and then what happened?
So we suggested that we could help remediate that using the sponge has three things that it can do. It can do diagnostics, can do remediation, and can do prevention. So we put a proposal to them. We were told by the Central Coast Council that they had problems across their waterways and they couldn't pick and choose which waterway they started with or did work on. We asked them to sign a release saying that we're happy to take the booms out but don't want to have any responsibility for any action further down the track. They wouldn't do that. And then they asked us to take them out. So we did.
Other questions by members? We'll go to the opposition. Mrs. McDonald.
So with the once you've removed, sorry, start again. Thank you for your submission. So it's not a once-off solution, is it? It has to be repeated.
It has to be repeated because the PFAS, and I don't know whether it's come out in your inquiry so far, but the PFAS will settle in the sediment on the base of a riverbed, a lake, a creek, in the sediment that builds up in stormwater outlets. And so as the water passes through, either the water has contaminants already. You never find PFAS in isolation. It's always mixed waste, right? So any water sample will be mixed waste. It's very easy when you're taking water samples to simply put your finger in the water and say, that's what's in that water and that's it. When really what you should be doing is trying to get a longer analysis of the water. So the sponge in its diagnostic form is capable of doing that. The water will continue to pass through. We know from the research that we've done, and I should just say too that whilst I don't have any scientific qualifications, our Chief Research Officer is a gentleman by the name of Professor Dr. Richard Bernardi, who was a distinguished fellow of the ANSTO, the Australian Nuclear Technology and Science Organisation. He's the gentleman who identified the qualities of the gyroid sponge, being the fact that it's a gyroid structure which has some physical properties, some chemical properties, and then what he's scientifically called some indeterminate or undescribable properties, because it does things that we didn't think it could do. And PFAS retention is one of them. And so from our perspective, the remediation can be done in the water. So as water passes through, the sponge is capable of taking the PFAS out, and up to over 90% of the PFAS can be removed from the water in a single pass. So if we were to set up in cereal the way that granular activated carbon is used, we believe that our solution not only cheaper, easier to deploy, and then easier to maintain and keep going, because of the end of life cycle of our product, the way that we designed it, it takes the PFAS out of the environment. And I think, Kate, I don't know if you have recognised my name as the person who helped set up the Organ and Tissue Friends of Parliament for New South Wales. I'm a liver transplant recipient and I'm immune compromised, so I'm very particular about what I do with my time and how I do things. I'd actually retired onto the Central Coast, and when I saw PFAS in the water, that raised alarm bells. So for the last 2.5 years, I've spent a considerable amount of time trying to understand this challenge. The reality is, when it comes to the range of chemicals, we can look at taking it out of the water. We can deploy trench-based soil remediation. So as groundwater rises up through the soil, that will flush the PFAS out. PFAS is not the sort of chemical that just sits there and waits for something to happen. In December of 2024, just a couple of months ago, I went to the Christie's Beach or Christie's Hill Metropolitan Fire Service Station, which was a contaminated site. And I was expecting, although I'd grown up in Adelaide, to go and see a fire station on the top of a hill, isolated. Right next door, and it was on the high side of a mound, it wasn't a hill in Adelaide, it's probably very flat. There was a Telstra building and then 16 flats on the same residential block. So that fire station, and I'd spoken to the senior fire officer who was involved, never used fire retardant chemicals on that site. So the PFAS that's on that site, they've been blamed for, but he tells me that it's not from them. There's a lot of industry around there, so the PFAS chemicals, as we've found, are proliferating through. And so fire retardant chemicals are the easy target, right? So if you see a fire, the fire, it's over there, that's where the fire, but who started it, where did it come from? So the reality is, PFAS, yes, it is out there, but it can be remediated one waterway at a time without the complex nature of the granular activated carbon, because one of the challenges you have with GAC is that once you've contaminated it, you have to then either incinerate it or bury it. So we either burn it or bury it. When you burn it, you create other toxins. When you bury it, you create a problem for later on. But if you use the titanium dioxide decomposition, we can break it down.
And is your technology at commercial scale?
It is. And the frustrating part is, on the 28th of January this year, last week, we signed a $20 million contract with Bharat CSR Network in India to deploy across the rivers of Goa, the Waste Management Centre, the Goa Waste Pollution Control Board. So we've had success overseas. We're going to the NSW conference in April in the UK. We launched in June last year. We have knocked on virtually every door here. I've written to journalists from every media outlet, the ABC, the Nine, everyone, telling them that we've got a solution here in Australia. I am a member of the ANSTO Nandan Innovation Crew. I co-chaired a webinar with Dr. Stuart Field and Dr. Elizabeth Tondell, and we spoke about the capabilities that we have, and we just can't get traction in this market because, like when we reported it to the Central Coast Council, they turned away and said thank you, but problem's too big for us.
So, just in your opinion, would mandatory sort of industry-funded remediation be an effective solution?
I think potentially so. I think one of the challenges that you've probably heard is that it's difficult to identify the source. One of the reasons why it's difficult to identify the source is it's difficult to collect the PFAS in significant quantities to determine who the source is. One of the things, and I heard one of the earlier presentations when it was the professor or the two gentlemen before Professor Naidu, they said that there's a lack of interest from people like the EPA and others. I believe that we actually reported to them, whether it's PFAS, hydrocarbons or other chemicals, the sponge acts like a vault. So as the toxins pass through the soil gyroid sponge, they're captured, and they can be captured in sufficient quantity to start doing things like fingerprint analysis of working out where did that come from. So we're able to tell the Central Coast Council the type of diesel, the type of chemicals that were in that diesel, and so we can do the same with PFAS. You can work out what PFAS are used to put into fuels as a catalyst for the different temperature to set the fuel off, into vaccines. For the vaccine, when we had the COVID vaccine, the chemicals used in that to set it off at body temperature, they're not necessarily good for us long term, but the reality is we can assist in diagnostics, identification, prevention and remediation.
Okay, I might just need to go to questions from government members.
Yeah, so thank you very much, and it's very enlightening, and congratulations on the work that's been put into the technology. With respect to the point you made about the collection using the boom, that obviously will capture that flowing down through a channel or a pipe, whatever the case may be. So that's flowing in.
Mm-hmm.
Interested if you could elucidate on the matter of the residue that may be on the bottom of the water.
Yeah.
How does it capture that? Because if it's actually just looking, and once again, thank you for your submissions and your supplementary submission on page 2, a picture of the boom, that it catches what's flowing, but what the residue that may be beyond the boom, it may well be the case that's already
settled.
Settled.
Yeah. So one of the great things about the soil dry ride sponge is its versatility and flexibility in deployment. As a company, when I started, the company was, it was focusing on things like bilge socks for boats in marinas.
Harbours,
The deployment on the Tuggerah Estuaries and stormwater trial proved to us that we can by using a process engineering application, so looking at what is the dirty water, what is the clean water, what do you want taken out of that water to make it clean, and then what is the scenario that you find yourself in. So we have now done tests for trench remediation, curtain deployment, column deployment. So
could you explain what trench remediation means, please?
So trench remediation is where we would actually dig a trench. So if you wanted to build a barrier, you could dig a trench, lay some agricultural pipe, and I've got all of this can be provided to the committee, or the hearing, sorry. We could lay a trench of soil dry ride boom in agricultural pipe, for example, so that the water can pass through it so it doesn't impede. And as the water passed from one side of the boom to the other, the water that passed through the soil would then be the water that hit the other side of the soil would actually have either no PFAS or reduced PFAS as a result of it. So it's actually deploying the sponge into the ground so that you collect groundwater. So we're currently in discussions with the Department of Defence to look at Amberley Air Force Base and building trench remediation around the runway there. It wouldn't. The great thing about the soil dry ride sponge is it doesn't have to be deployed in exactly the same way in every environment. And we heard Professor Naidu talking about the different soils that exist here in Australia versus other places. But I'd also argue that one of the reasons we have 201 districts in Australia is because we have different soil in the Clare Valley and Barossa Valley versus the Hunter Valley. So the wines out of the Hunter Valley, I still think it's superior, but that's irrelevant. We can deploy it using our PAGE process, which is the pollutant adaptive gradient extraction process, which is where we treat the sponge either with heat, chemicals, or the way in which it's deployed. And then by looking at what is the dirty water, what is the clean water, we can engineer a solution for a lot less budget than what is currently the remediation processes that are used globally.
One final question before I pass to my colleague. Going back to the matter of the project on the lake, Tuggerah Lake, I didn't quite understand that part of your explanation whereby as you approach the conclusion of the project, the timeline for it, did you have concern of potential liability as a business?
Correct. Having identified PFAS.
Okay, right. So that might be a matter that could be liability.
Yes.
In a legal sense.
So do you like, if I was a first responder, an ambulance officer, and I put a bandage on you And just before you got into the ambulance and went off to hospital, you said, "Can you take the bandage off me?" And then you bled out. Yeah.
Yes, okay.
Am I responsible for your death?
Yeah.
And so in this case, we identified PFAS on Tuggerah Lake. It's now been confirmed from other studies around Lake Mamora and the northern part of Tuggerah Lakes and on Arimba Creek that PFAS is prevalent throughout the waterways of the Central Coast. And having brought that to Council's attention and been dismissed, we didn't want to have anyone going back through this sort of inquiry saying, well, hang on, this company here identified that to you, and then they pulled their booms out.
Understand. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, and thanks for your submission. I just wanted to ask a bit more about the trial that occurred at Tuggerah Lakes and just see, in terms of the feedback from the council and what they said, you said they're not interested in taking up the technology and rolling it out elsewhere. Was there anything detrimental that came out of the trial, for example? I mean, is it a hazard to fish?
From my perspective, you'd know this, representing the state of New South Wales as a politician. To talk about the council as a monolith is probably the wrong way to look at it. The people in the waterways were very concerned about what was happening. And they were actually the people pushing for us to widen the use of the booms across Tuggerah Lakes. Other areas, engineering, stormwater, and those people whose budget it was probably going to come out of were the ones who were reluctant to progress and do more about it. Yeah. So there are people within council who want to resolve the problem, but then they'll turn around and say, well, we can't do anything because we've got to look at Erina or we've got to look at other waterways within the council.
Sure, but were there any other concerns raised by them as a result of the trial, or was it just a money issue? I mean,
there were
no government wants to be responsible.
No, well, we said that would be
so it should be the state or somebody else. But outside the money, were there any other issues that came up?
No, it was certainly when you talk about money too. We said we'd work with the EPA so that polluter would pay. But the original purpose of the trial was to take hydrocarbons out of the water. So as soon as we went beyond our scope, that was identified as the reason. So they didn't say that, well, you've identified PFAS, we don't want to touch it. They said, well, the issue with regarding hydrocarbons, we've got problems everywhere. So
have you looked to do a PFAS or PFOA specific trial with the sponge somewhere?
Yes. So as I said, we're working with the engineering company that's looking after Embley Air Force Base to put that process in trial, and we've been working with the PFAS remediation team for the federal government since October of 2023 to develop that trial. One of the problems that we had, and this is in an email which I can provide the committee, we were told that our original scope for the proof of concept demonstration at $35,000 was well below their normal budget for these sort of activities.
And that was a problem?
So too cheap a solution.
Too cheap a solution, which is probably why it's been picked up in India, because over there we can do a lot more with a lot less, and they're happy to do that.
What was your response as counterintuitive? What was your response when that was put to you?
Well, it's like I've said on the global stage in presentations. We're a first world country with first world problems, and we don't like third world solutions, when a third world solution is all we need to fix this problem.
Can I ask then, just in terms of around, sorry, they're not going to, just around the area, Central Coast, what is being done that you know of to clean up PFAS in waterways? Is there anything?
As far as I'm aware, nothing.
Okay,
yeah.
Thank you.
And that was born out of the fact that after the Newcastle University's Arimba campus, which is right on Arimba Creek itself, identified through the necropsies of the platypus, which was, I went on ABC radio at the end of last year to talk about that specific issue with Scott Levi, and we've had zero response from them because they've had zero response from anyone who wants to help them identify it. Because we actually offered, and I'll do the same with Professor Naidu, we're happy to offer our gyroid sponge to anyone for free to demonstrate its capabilities, because we believe it's an Australian discovery backed by research, advanced by science, that is going to take off, has taken off overseas, but not here at home.
Mr. Barrett.
Possibly a very broad question, and asking from a community perspective, like what does utopia look like for you with this product? Like are we using it to stop PFAS getting in waterways? Are we going to, can we use it to clean up the situation we saw in Katoomba the other day? And then I guess if you want to go on a bit of a ramble, what do you need to get to that point?
A very good question, and I've heard that said to you a few times today. Utopia looks like where we understand just how big the problem is. I think it's easy to say it's too big for us to address. One of the challenges that we have, and we heard before about from the two speakers before me, the ability to actually test where the problem is. Like it reminds me of the story of the police officer who went over to the drunk guy staggering around under the street light. And the officer said, "Are you okay?" And he says, "Yeah, I'm looking for my keys. I can't find them." He said, "Did you lose them around here?" He said, "No, I lost them over there, but there's no light and I can't see." So we're happy, it seems to be, as bureaucracies, to say, well, if we don't know where the problem is or where it's coming from, then we don't have to look everywhere for it because everyone's saying it's everywhere, so if it's everywhere, we can't fix it. The reality is, if you can identify source by even within something like Arimba Creek, Tumby Creek, Brisbane Waters, the Sydney Harbour, we're looking to work with Sydney University on trials where we put it in at places like Rhodes and other places, because for me, how do we get there? As I said, we're happy to give our sponge to anyone who wants to demonstrate the capabilities of this product. The reality is we can develop solutions, like Professor Naidu said, at residential level so that it can be used for filters on taps. We can use it for trench remediation around long runways for the airports, and every airport in the world has the problem, so they're part of the 10 million sites that are contaminated. The reality is we stand on the precipice of something that is well beyond our comprehension as to how vast this problem is and how long it will take to clean up. But we have to start somewhere. Our solution is, a fraction, like many fractions less than the current methodologies that are used. So if we look at the Blue Mountains water treatment plant, very curious that they announced that there was PFAS in the water, shut the dams down, and 3 months later opened up a $3.5 million plant. I don't know how you could build it that quickly. So they knew it was there for a long time before they announced it, and that's the same in every council. We're currently talking with Shire Biz, which is a group down in the Sutherland Shire, to see how we can help them with Sylvania Waters and other waterways. But we're a small team. How do we get there? We're going to do it because as a company we've decided that we are going to clean the world's oceans one waterway at a time. Thankfully, the Indian state government of Goa found that we were the right solution for them, and as the money flows in from that, we'll deploy it here on backyard projects.
Are the booms manufactured here in Australia?
The booms can be made here in Australia. The gyroid sponge has to go through a particular process, which we've only found 2 manufacturers in the world that can do what we need them to do. Only one was prepared to use our formula. They're based in Malaysia. We bring the sponge from Malaysia, and we create the booms both here in New South Wales and in Perth. But in our whole philosophy as a company, and it is to, if I was to just take a leaf out of our Indian company, which I travelled to India for the first time in May of 24, was to pick up on Modi's vision of made in India, sold to the world. But ultimately, as a company, we want to make the victims of pollution the beneficiaries of remediation. So in India, for example, the Sayampurwana women, which is the self-sustainability, and it does sound gender biased, but in India it is a very gender-biased country. They call them the Sayampurwana women. They're going to be making the booms from recycled fabric that they recycle themselves with the sponge that we give them, and they're giving the booms to the fishermen who will fish for oil and trawl for plastic and then turn that into valuable building materials.
Just a couple of quick questions.
There's no time for a couple of quick questions. Sorry.
One quick
He
question?
took the last one. No, he took the last one. 10:46. 10:46. Thank you so much for